All right, we welcome you into a special edition of the ESPN 1320 podcast here. I'm Damien Barling along with Amber Stott, the host of a new radio.com podcast, Raising Kale. This is going to be fun to talk about for a number of different reasons. The main one, I have heard you're before we get to the podcast specifics, you're the founder of and the CEO of the Food Literacy Center.
Yes, I am.
And
Yeah,
I've heard a lot about the Food Literacy Center over the last few years. What exactly is it?
sure. It's a nonprofit, and our mission is to inspire kids to eat their vegetables. So we
Mm,
work with elementary kids from Title I schools. Those are low income schools. And typically, these kids are in these schools, there's like an 80% to 100% free and reduced lunch participation, which basically means that these kids don't necessarily have a lot of food at home and that their families are on a tight budget and likely live in poverty. For example, one of our schools, the average family income is $8,000 a year.
wow. That's often one of the things that you hear most, and it's not wrong when you talk about eating healthy. Like you can get like a dollar meal, you can get hamburgers and hot dogs and French fries for $1 for $1. It's more difficult to get quality food at an affordable price. And when you're working with low income families and low income kids, what challenges do you face? Because I know that's the first thing people bring up to me when we talk about eating healthy is the cost of it.
Absolutely. It's partly the cost. A lot of it is time. That's a big barrier for our families because maybe they have a single mom and she's working two jobs. Maybe there is not access to that food. So maybe they live in a neighborhood. Many of our schools are in what the USDA would deem a food desert. And that basically means that there is a lack of quick access to a grocery store that has a produce aisle. Within walking distance or a quick bike ride might be a convenience store where maybe they have some bananas, but largely they have a lot of packaged products on the shelf. So the problem is that our kids don't face just one barrier, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
cost might be one barrier, but then you stack all of these other barriers on top of that, and essentially our kids are living with what we call social determinants of health. So all of these social factors that limit the kinds of food that they have access to. And essentially, it puts our kids, the ones that we're serving, at highest risk for diet-related diseases like childhood obesity, diabetes. And these are preventable diseases if we eat well. The good news is that because many of our kids are eating school lunch, they do have access to a pretty good quality meal. And in California, they have access to salad bars. But the other barrier to that is that if you don't know what is on that salad bar because you've maybe never seen it before,
Mm-hmm.
the likelihood that you're going to eat it is much lower. So we want to make sure that the kids are actually consuming those fresh fruits and vegetables while they're at school, because we do know that they have access to those. And of course, right now during the pandemic, the schools are doing a lot to distribute healthy food to the homes, and so is Food Literacy Center.
How much work do you have to do with the parents in terms of getting young people to eat healthy? Because I got to imagine that's a barrier also.
It can be a barrier, but what's interesting about kids, and they're even saying like during the pandemic, one reason they want kids back in school is because kids are, they're really good at learning new behaviors and following behaviors and bringing them back home. So for example, mask wearing, they're saying right now during the pandemic, it would be helpful if schools were in session because kids would be learning these tips and bringing them home to parents. And as a society, it makes us better. So when we look at, for example, successful behavior change campaigns like wearing seatbelts or anti-tobacco, where did we target first? As a society, we brought those not to drivers and smokers, but to kids, because we didn't want them to develop those habits at all. And so that's how we approach healthy eating. We want them to develop a good, healthy habit so that we don't have to try to undo a bad habit once they become adults. And then they go home and they pester power their parents
Mhm.
and convince them like, hey, we talked about budgets before. And so if your kid is coming home and saying, I tasted cactus for the first time and I love it, would you buy that for me? As a parent, and I'm from a low income family, I don't have a lot of money. Cactus sounds affordable. And I'm not going to take a risk on purchasing a fruit or vegetable and bringing it home if I don't think my kid's going to eat it. I don't have the ability to do that taste education that a wealthier family might, where I buy 3 things and bring it home. So that's kind of a barrier we remove for the families by providing our kids with these things to taste. So when they do go home, the parents tell us, we were so excited to take our child to find kale because we knew we could do something that was, it's not new sneakers, it's kale. So the parents are pretty excited when their kids come home and want a thing and it's a new vegetable.
Two things. I personally love the new sneakers, but that's a different conversation. I love the phrase taste education. I'm absolutely going to use that in my everyday life. I love that phrase. It's such a great line, taste education. 2, I'm pretty astute when it comes to eating, particularly plant-based eating. Is cactus a food?
It is nopales. Yes, it's delicious and drought tolerant. Yeah, it's very popular in a lot of Mexican cuisine. They come in paddles. They have spikes, and you cut the spikes away, and it tastes like a citrusy green bean. Oftentimes, it's sautéed with like garlic and onion, thrown in a taco, for example.
Huh.
Super delicious. One of my personal favorite vegetables. I grow it in my backyard because I like it so much now.
You grow cactus in your backyard. This is fascinating. We're only 6 minutes into this. This is extraordinary. I'm already learning something. I've never had cactus before. We
got to get you some. You're gonna like it.
No, absolutely. It's on my list now. Speaking of, like, how do you go to a kid and say, hey, you know what a cactus is? You've seen a cactus. You see it in your cartoons. It's the little thing in the How do you convince them? No, eat it. Like, no, try it. You'll love it.
So a couple of things. First, I'll talk about something called a positive deviant. And then secondly, I'll talk about our broccoli boundaries and our radish routines. So in society, there are what we call positive deviants. And these are the people who, when you're trying to get others excited about something new or different, there's going to be somebody who's done that thing. And because we're working in such diverse classrooms, oftentimes there are kids whose grandma is cooking cactus because she's also growing it in the backyard, right? And so when we bring out a cactus, there are usually a couple of kids who have seen it. So this is when we get to our broccoli boundaries and our radish routines. So we create a classroom environment that is going to be successful to behavior change. We want to create boundaries and repeatable behaviors that will result in our kids consuming vegetables. So the broccoli boundary that we might set up, we have one that's called "Don't Yuck My Yum." So we say to the kids, because their immediate reaction is to say, ew, gross, to anything new you give them.
Sure.
So we say, don't yuck my yum, because something you might not like might be your neighbor's very favorite thing, and we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So back to that positive deviant, if we have this rule, don't yuck my yum, and there's a kid in the class who's not being yucked, who recognizes cactus and perks up because it's culturally an appropriate food that they recognize that maybe they were too shy to talk about in school because it's not on the cafeteria menu, suddenly they see it and it's being celebrated, then they might perk up and say, yeah, my grandma makes that. And suddenly the other kids turn and go, wait, that kid eats it? That's my friend. It might not be so bad. It might be safe. And suddenly you get all of these kids who are really excited to taste cactus.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic, because that in my experience, that doesn't work with adults. I feel like adults are so resistant to, I feel like you know how they say, when you have a conversation or, on the radio, politics and religion, you don't talk about that. Bring up somebody's eating habits. Like, tell them, hey, someone's saying, hey, I don't feel great. Like, hey, maybe you should give up dairy. Oh, what am I going to put in my coffee? Oh, like, you've got to be kidding me. Give up dairy. Like, get out of here, you crazy
So what
person.
you're driving at is taking away, right? So So we know that kids are eating junk food and stuff that's not great for them.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't start by talking trash about what they currently eat, right? What we want to do, especially because these are food insecure kids, we don't know. Maybe all they have at home in their fridge is bologna. We don't want them to feel bad about that. So we try to meet them where they're at. And instead of talking about what they shouldn't eat or what we want to take away, we say, we want to introduce you to all these great fruits and vegetables that you've been missing. They're so delicious. We love them so much, and we think you're going to love them too. So we kind of spin with this positive reinforcement and then we try to find foods that are culturally appropriate that they recognize, and we make very minor adjustments and sort of bring them along. We don't start with a brown rice and kale salad. We actually start with a peanut butter sandwich, and we swap out the jelly for fresh fruit slices. And we tell the kids, we want you to eat a fruit or vegetable with every snack or meal.
It's my personal favorite, by the way.
A peanut butter sandwich
with like sliced strawberries inside of it.
Right? Like, and these kids, they also fall in love with this stuff. So it's a really great, simple entryway. And then we go to like tacos or pho, or, we go with foods that we know our kids are already eating, and we make these slight adjustments, and then we show them how to add fruits and vegetables to their favorite foods. And as we go along, we talk about, things that are better for our bodies than others, how sugar affects our body, how salt affects our body. But we start with, we're giving you something, right? And so I think that difference really, and the adults that volunteer in our program respond to that as well.
Well, I was going to say, I'm going to propose something, because I'm sure you're not busy with all of this at all. You need Food Literacy Center, the graduate program, where adults come in and understand why they've been eating, the things that they're eating are contributing to the heart pains that they're having, or the skin problems that they're having, or the digestive problems that they're having. And that's why I love the idea so much. That's why I love what the Food Literacy Center is so much, because it starts young. And I always, like, if you could just go back to the things that you were taught as a kid, you abandon them as a teenager and maybe in your like early 20s, but at some point you get back to it and go, man, like, I learned eating my fruits and vegetables like in the first grade was the way to go, and here I am at 30 whatever, or 40, or however old you are, if you ever have that epiphany, going, oh yeah, I probably should have just followed that track my first grade teacher sent me on however many years ago.
Absolutely. And this is exactly what we find. And we do actually train adults. We train an annual food literacy academy where we train community members as volunteers. And we've actually shifted to training moms. So we want the moms to be volunteers in our program, and they sign up because, of course, they're excited because they want to participate in the class with their kids. And they want to improve their own community. And through that, they end up learning a lot of things about their own recipes and their own foods. And and so we'll actually make little swaps. We'll vote on, like, what do you guys want to cook today? And if they say spaghetti, we'll say, okay, great. We're going to develop a great spaghetti marinara recipe, and we're going to show you how to eat it with sauteed veggies. And we'll come out and they'll say, well, where's the meatballs? And we're like, well, today we're learning to eat it with sauteed veggies. If you make it at home, you can also add meatballs, but today we're going to show you how to add vegetables. So,
do you focus on plant-based stuff?
Well, we want to teach kids to eat fruits and vegetables. So that is the main item in all of the foods that we cook. Yeah. And also for food safety reasons, we're cooking in classrooms. Sure. So yeah, we don't use a lot of meat and dairy, but that's largely for food safety. But again, if that's how kids eat at home, we just want them to learn how to add the fruits and vegetables to that.
So as we segue here into Raising Kale, our new radio.com podcast, is that what Raising Kale is about? Is it about healthy eating and how to structure meals and things like that?
It's actually more about those social determinants of health that I talked about earlier, those barriers that surround this idea of healthy eating. And those are really complicated. And we have a hard time breaking that down when we talk to adults, when we talk to the public, to donors even. And so this podcast was a way for us begin to unpack all these more complicated issues that surround why our kids need food literacy in the first place. What is wrong with our food system in the first place that the kids we're serving are left out of the health food equation. So it's less about tips for parents and more about unpacking all of these social issues, and then also showing what solutions are out there around the country.
What is the biggest? First of all, Raising Kale is a fantastic name. So well done on that. That's fantastic. But you talked about the social issues surrounding food. What is is there one in particular that stands out, like this is the one that we have to address the most, or the one we have to address first?
I wish there were. And I think that's part of the problem. And for me, I've only ever worked in nonprofit. I always knew I wanted to sort of solve problems in the world and make it better than what I found it. And what I like about food is it intersects with so many of the issues that I personally care about. So if you care about environmental justice, racial justice, if you care about pay equity, if you care about labor rights, you name the issue, health, name the issue, there is some way, shape, or form that our food system is wrapped up in that. Yeah. And for me, I find that food is also a joyful place to create solutions to some of these bigger problems. So I find that people are more willing to step up and learn about these solutions through the pathway of food, because it is something that we all enjoy. So it kind of opens up the conversation in a joyful way to talk about these tough issues.
We hear the term comfort food so often, right? Like, so we turn to food for comfort, and this is
comfort for our minds to get into these subjects, for sure.
But it is, you bring up such a fantastic point where you talk about all those issues of healthcare inequality and racial injustices and different things like that. The food system in some way, shape, or form can get wrapped up in that. You talked about lower income children that you work with, or kids that come from lower income families, and oftentimes, those are Black and brown kids, and they're living in communities where there's fast food restaurant. There's easily accessible garbage food rather than the corner store, or rather than the place that you can go get, fresh fruits and vegetables.
Yes. And, that some people would say is food apartheid, right? It's designed in a way that's broken. It's not designed equally. And so we invite guests on Raising Kale, and so I consider people who are kale raisers to be people who get in good trouble using food as a tool. And so, for example, one of the kale raisers that we had on was, she's the policy director for the National Farm to School Network. And she talks about how school lunch can help end racial injustice. And it's very much for these reasons that our school lunch program is typically most actively being participated in Black and brown communities where they need free lunch. She's working on a universal lunch program where it takes the stigma away if, for example, you go to school and everybody gets a lunch. It's not a some people bring cold lunch, some people bring hot lunch. It's not a, well, we can't afford lunch. And because you'll find that kids, especially as they get older, like into high school, they will simply go hungry rather than have their peers know that they rely on school lunch.
Sure.
And so if we can undo some of these things and destigmatize and make a universal lunch program, what could that do for kids' self-esteem? And how could that level the playing field for kids in any and all schools? So that's something she's working on, and we talk about as one of the guests on Raising Kale.
I really very much appreciate the use of good trouble in that, by the way. That is fantastic. Who are some of the other, I was going to say, who are some of the other people that you're talking to? I'll rephrase it. Who are some of the other kale raisers that are going to be a part of the podcast?
Yeah, I speak with one of my friends who is a chef farmer in Illinois, and he was working in Vegas in elite restaurants as a chef. and his dad came out to dine with him, and he yelled at his son about how stupid the food was in this elite restaurant. And it made this, my friend, his name is Ken, made him rethink what he was doing. And now he packed up, moved back home to semi-rural Illinois, and began life as a farmer, and decided to grow everything that he uses in his restaurant and to cook a food that is more sustainable to the planet, cook foods that similar to what Food Literacy Center does, that meet people where they're at. He had served his dad a tornado carrot. And so Ken in this episode tells us what a tornado carrot is and why his dad thought that was stupid, and how it gave him this awakening to sort of reevaluate how we look at food and what we value when it comes to our food.
I was going to ask, but I'll just wait for the episode to find out exactly what that carrot is.
Yeah.
You mentioned the sustainability of food, and obviously in the reference that you were using, growing the food yourself and cooking it. How much of that is a part of the curriculum, perhaps for lack of a better word, that you teach at the Food Literacy Center? This is the sustainability and how it's helpful for the planet.
Yeah. So we define food literacy as understanding the impact of your food choices on health, environment, and economy. And we try to tackle those three things with our kids. Health is a real big one, because we know that kids can control their own health when they learn to be advocates for their own health. But we absolutely talk about the environment and the planet, and how what you eat that's good for you is also good for the planet. Going back to that cactus that we talked about, we created a cactus taco, and we created that lesson back during the last drought, because we wanted kids to understand the difference between thirsty plants that need a lot of water and a drought tolerant plant that maybe needs less water. And we could also eat that, and it's also good for our bodies. So we definitely talk about things like that. We look at composting, we grow food together. Yeah, it's very important.
What's the biggest thing, or is there, that you want out of the podcast, that you want people to take away when they listen to Raising Kale?
I really want to create a revolution, right? We need to fix our broken food system. All of us right now during COVID are experiencing this. When this crisis first started, we couldn't find flour, we couldn't find eggs, store shelves were empty. This is because our food system has breaks in it. It is not perfect. And those of us who got affected better or worse in this pandemic also has a lot to do with things like the food apartheid, right? Like the kids that we're serving, we saw food and nutrition insecurity skyrocket during this crisis. And we are actually looking at data showing that it's going to take 10 years for these families to climb out of this level of poverty. So I want people to understand these issues and how close they are to home. I want people to understand that there are kale raisers out there doing something about this, and that they can roll up their sleeves and join. We need a revolution of people that know and understand this. When you go to the grocery store, there is a difference between the kinds of foods that you can select and how they impact our health, our environment, and our planet. And we want everybody to get in good trouble with their food. So that's the hope with the podcast.
We're going to mess around and become best friends with you words using terms like good trouble and revolution and things like that. You could like the Malcolm X of food here. And
Yes.
I absolutely love it. When does the podcast debut? I know it's coming up soon.
It's coming out next week on March 10th.
That's exciting. That's really exciting. Which have you discussed which one is the first episode?
We are dropping 3 on March 10th. So you'll learn about the chef farmer, and you will hear from the National Farm to School Network policy director that I spoke of earlier. And you'll also hear from my friend and mentor, Elise, who started actually the world's largest recipe website with one of her parents' favorite recipes for oxtail stew.
Oh my, what website is it?
Simply Recipes.
Oh, okay. Wow, she started it. That's something.
Yeah,
Okay.
she's incredible and she's a wonderful human. So yeah, it was a delight to talk about her journey. And really her whole wish was to sort of, I consider food bloggers to help democratize food, right? Like they're making these foods approachable, things
Mhm.
that maybe you thought you couldn't make or you were afraid to try. They break them down and they make them very approachable, and they make them so that you can feel comfortable and confident because you can interact with a blogger. So I really think that people who are teaching us to cook are true kale raisers. So we have a great conversation with her.
And that's one thing I don't think people who like people will always say they do, I don't know how to cook. I don't know how to cook. It's because they probably didn't take the time to learn to cook. And it's just like when you learn to do anything else, you have to go through the steps. Like you have to go from like beginner to intermediate to advanced. Like you can't just jump to being, your friend who grows his own food and cooks it in fancy restaurants. Like nobody does that, or very few people do that. You have to go through the steps, and I find a lot of people kind of give up along the way. Whereas if you just kind of stick with it, you find like cooking, like as busy as my days are, I still very much love to cook. I had done food services that were delivering and stuff, and like that doesn't work for me. Like I want to cook. I want to be hands-on with this stuff. And I think it's important for people to go through the pains of that process
Well,
and learn
and
how to do it.
totally. And you need good teachers, right? And the best bloggers out there are really good teachers.
Mhm.
So that's part of it. We need good teachers. And I think also the thing about the teachers is that they give us tips for how to get our time back
Mhm.
while we're learning to cook. We have two generations of Americans that actually don't know how to prepare food um, from scratch, right? There's a lot of opening of jars of spaghetti sauce that's already been made. But when you cook it from a canned tomato rather than a a finished sauce, you control how much salt, you control how much sugar, you control all the ingredients. And
Yeah.
so that's what we're trying to break down for folks because it can be very intimidating. If that's what you've known growing up eating, to look at that canned to just a can of tomatoes, how do you turn that into the thing that you love? So you need good teachers for sure. And so this is part of the importance of our improved food system, right? Where do we find the best teachers?
It can be intimidating, but so satisfying
Absolutely.
when you get that finished product. And then you get bold and you start playing around with different stuff and go, I'm gonna try this instead, or I'm gonna replace this ingredient and use this ingredient. And it's just part of the process. If you stick with it like you stick with everything else, it's you go to the gym the first time. Like you're not gonna lose 20 pounds the first time you go to the gym, just like you're not gonna cook that 7 course masterpiece the first time you get into the kitchen. But if you stay with it, I think more people will find when they stick with it, they'll love cooking. And I think part of cooking for me, especially for me, is the more I learned about food, the more it helped me.
Yes.
The more it helped me like in the kitchen, and it helped me decide, what types of food I wanted to eat and what type of vegetables I wanted to eat and different things like that. And of all of the flavors I've had, I'm still blown away by the cactus. So I can't wait to try that one.
I can't wait to introduce you to your first one.
Amber, the work you're doing is incredible. I'm excited for the podcast on radio.com on March 10th, and the work that you're doing with the Food Literacy Center is incredible. So thank you for all that you do.
Oh my goodness. Thank you for having me. It was really fun to chat. Thank you.
Yeah,
Keep
absolutely.
raising kale out there yourself.
March 10th, Raising Kale on the radio.com app. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.